Rote memorization is good, actually. A video essay by This Guy Reads. When you were in school, did you ever have to recite a poem by heart in front of your English class? If you're younger than 30, I suspect you never had that experience. In my case, I certainly did. And looking back, I'm more and more grateful for it as time goes on. So, based on my admittedly brief research, the practice of having students recite poetry by memory has all but faded out, especially over the past few decades. I was able to find a few exceptions and some evidence of a resurgence, but it really does seem like it's pretty much died out as a pedagogical practice. And that's actually quite a shame. It's easy to latch onto poetry recitation and its absence from modern curriculums. I think because it's inherently emotional and often nostalgic. That's what poetry does, right? It evokes feelings. But I actually think this is the canary in the coal mine for a deeper problem. As a society, we just don't exercise our innate memorization abilities nearly enough. Our working memories, much like our attention spans, have atrophied over time from disuse and neglect. And this is part of a larger cultural shift that's become extremely pronounced over the past decade, especially. So, as we outsource more and more of our cognitive tasks, and I think increasingly our executive reasoning abilities, to various technologies like smartphones, large language models, generative AI, we just need to be cognizant of what we're losing and how we can compensate. After all, our ancestors were able to recite entire epics by rote. Think of Beowulf and the Iliad, while we struggle to even remember the phone numbers of our closest friends and family. The late great literary critic Harold Bloom said of the importance of memory.
Memory is the major element in cognition, in everything that we call the humanities. If you cannot remember, then you can't think, and you can't imagine, and you can't write, and you can hardly read.
I think it is also to Professor Bloom that we must turn to find a way out of this mess. In an interview at the turn of the century, he said,
I think that we lost a great deal in education in this country and in other countries when we stopped teaching people to memorize. Obviously, just repeating something by rote without understanding does no good whatsoever. But to possess something by memory, to really read a poem hundreds of times because it can sustain hundreds of readings. I think if you possess a poem by memory, then it begins to possess you. And you learn how to be alone with it. You learn it more and more deeply. It alters you, I think. It changes you.
Now, I still remember the poem I recited in my 8th grade English class. So embedded is it in my long-term memory. I was lucky to be able to choose. Many others were assigned poems, often much longer than the one I chose. I'll go ahead and recite it now, with my eyes closed, just in case you don't believe me. And then just a side note here, it actually really helps if you do it with a bad accent. In this case, I'll do how I envision an English elf sounding. All right, let's do it. Gil-galad was an elven king. Of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are. So despite me having that experience in grade school, which I think is, in my age range, was probably still kind of out of the ordinary, I went to a Catholic school, so, they were focused a little bit more on a classical education. I didn't carry this practice with me into adulthood. And I suspect that's the case with many of you watching. If you were even given an experience like this at all in school. It was really only very recently, after having read a book by Harold Bloom called How to Read and Why, that I started intentionally memorizing poems again. And I'm not going to lie, once I started, it was really hard to stop. It's kind of like Pokemon in a way. Once you start, you got to catch them all. Now, there are 2 poems in particular that Bloom recommends, kind of as starting poems that are easy to memorize and relatively short. They also have really catchy and kind of even cadences that make them easy to possess, as in the parlance of Harold Bloom. The first of these is The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now, you might have read this in school. This is a very famous English poem. I'll go ahead and recite it for you now. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. Close to the sun in lonely lands, ringed with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls, he watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. Now, the second poem is actually a snatch of song by E. E. Housman. It's called A Shropshire Lad. It's quite beautiful, and I think I'd recommend it as a first poem if you're too bothered to go out and find one for yourself. It's really catchy, but I'll spare you another recital because I think I've probably already tortured you enough with those. But now you might be wondering, okay, we know the problem, sounds cool. Maybe I can memorize some poetry, work on my memory. How do you put this into practice though? So I think the best way is to first just write out the poem you've chosen by hand on flashcards with one stanza or grouping of verses per card. And spoiler alert, writing things by hand is still to this day one of the best ways to commit them to memory. I would say it is the best way. Now, once you've written the poem out, start by practicing your recital by starting with the first card. Just read it out, try to recite it from memory. If you make a mistake or you forget the next line, just look at the flashcard and then read it aloud. Then just try again. If you get it right, move on to the next card and just repeat the process. Every time you do mess up though, once you've kind of corrected your mistakes, take the whole thing from the top, just start over. And you're basically kind of building a snowball of the poem in your memory. So just do this for 10 to 15 minutes per day for a few days, maybe a week if you're just getting started. And what you'll notice is that the poem will be very firmly wedged in your long-term memory. And then after that, it's pretty much done. Just to keep it there, maybe recite it once a month. I can't even remember the last time I recited these poems, but they're pretty embedded. Take this as a fair warning though. Once you start possessing these poems, you won't want to stop. You're liable to severely annoy your spouse or roommates. So I just have to say, you've been warned. Do you have a go-to poem that you like to annoy people with already? Just post it in the comments below. Please share it with us. If not, go out and find one, memorize it, and then just come back and share that with us. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got any value out of it whatsoever, please like and subscribe. And just remember, if you can't print it, you don't own it.